Now, all this week, Mobile World Live has been looking at the secrets to 5G success. As 5G networks continue to be deployed, the industry is exploring new strategies, partnerships, and technologies to drive growth. An open approach to business really does sit at the heart of this shift. And in this special program today, we're going to be discussing this open approach in the form of OpenRAN. And we'll be looking at some of the challenges and opportunities ahead with an open network architecture. I've got two expert guests with me to lead the debate. First up, I'd like to introduce Bejoy Pankajakshan. Bejoy is Chief Technology and Strategy Officer at cloud-native network software company Mavenir. Welcome, Bejoy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we also have the head of Analyst House, GSMA Intelligence, Peter Jarich. Good to see you, Peter, as always.
Hi, Justin.
Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. Let's start, if we may, by looking at the impact OpenRAN is having on today's mobile networks, particularly new 5G networks. Peter, it's early days, of course, for OpenRAN, but tell us, what trends are you seeing in the market in terms of how OpenRAN is really driving innovation in 5G?
So what I think is interesting is, and it's appropriate to call this out as part of a discussion around 5G, but there's a bit of a tension here, right? That OpenRAN isn't just about 5G, right? You can obviously apply it to other technologies, 2G, 3G, 4G, and I think Mavenir would be some great folks to talk to about that, given the work that they've done. But what we find when we go out and talk to operators is that 5G is really this trigger that for a lot of them, they look at 5G as an opportunity to do things differently in their network. And when we go out and we talk to them, you find the vast majority, 70% plus, say that, yeah, 5G will be a trigger for them to look at OpenRAN. Doesn't mean others won't move sooner, but for a lot of them, it's really 5G will drive that interest in OpenRAN. And it's a great way to rethink what you're doing.
So with 5G driving interest in OpenRAN, Bejoy, as OpenRAN becomes more embedded in the 5G network, which of course we're hoping for, what impacts will that have on 5G deployment, do you think?
So OpenRAN by definition is about open standardized interfaces, which means that you could have a mix of different vendors and it provides inter-vendor interoperability. So from an operator standpoint, is looking to bring in new players into this market. This is a great opportunity. And as Peter just mentioned, it then applies not just to the newly built 5G networks, but also to the existing brownfield deployments of 4G, 3G, and 2G. And this is a space that Mavenir has invested in the last 6 years. We're now the leaders in OpenRAN. In addition to that, as operators are looking to build out 5G end-to-end automated networks, OpenRAN gives a great opportunity to actually use the same tool sets across the end-to-end network. So it could be on the core, the transport, and now relaying it onto the access side as well. It could be things like CI/CD frameworks, the analytics framework, the observability framework that's built and existing in the operator network, you now utilize and extend it to the radio as well. And the advantage here is that with this capability, now we could apply AI, ML, and other techniques. You could gather rather meaningful insights from these complex data patterns and make 5G that truly autonomous network that we're all envisioning that's data-driven. So OpenRAN has a lot to play in 5G, but it's also about the existing brownfield deployments as well.
Bejoy, your company also describes itself, as I mentioned in the beginning, as a cloud-native network software provider. What have we learned from 5G deployments so far about the importance of cloud-native architecture adoption?
5G, as you're aware, it supports high data rates, you have low latency applications, and you have a large number of devices. So what that means is you end up with a heterogeneous data type from a diverse set of applications. So having the network automated is mandatory at this point, which means that you need to be taking corrective actions ahead of time. And OpenRAN helps there with its cloud nativeness because you now have the capability to apply those automation tools and make these networks truly predictive rather than being reactive. Secondly, with OpenRAN being microservice architecture, you hear a lot about edge computing. You have the capability to now place these workloads at the right locations. For example, for edge locations serving low latency applications, you bring it closer to the user. And finally, with the cloud nativeness, the capability to run in any cloud environment. Dish is a good example of this, where OpenRAN is being run within the public cloud AWS in this particular case. But you're able to use those tools that are natively available within the public cloud to manage these workloads and hence obtain the efficiencies of running the network the best possible way.
Yeah, your second point there, Bejoy, I mean, that touched on how operators are really exploring edge service opportunities. And there is a lot of talk about what the distributed edge cloud promises. Is OpenRAN likely to really help shape the telco edge platform?
It does, because if you think of edge computing, it's about pushing compute closer to the user. And it could be for use cases that is for consumers, such as AR, VR, for enterprises, you hear about industrial automation and other such use cases. But it's also about the network optimization itself. So OpenRAN can provide an edge platform on top of which a lot of innovation can happen. You talk about co-location capabilities, the user plane function co-located with the radio functions for enterprise or edge applications, the near real-time radio intelligent controller that's co-located with the distributed unit. It then gives an opportunity to gather meaningful insight and also have third-party applications be hosted on this edge platform, which then could be offered for new services that goes to the consumer or the enterprises. So it's a great platform as an edge platform for innovation, and it can be applied not just to the new 5G networks that are happening, but also to the existing brownfield deployments.
Yeah, I would just add on that it wasn't too long ago, I'm coming off of going to MWC LA, where edge was a huge topic. And one of the things that was brought up was just this reality that we think of edge a lot of times as sort of third-party applications, but operator functions are obviously something that can also go on the edge. And that fits exactly into what Bejoy is saying in terms of OpenRAN, right? But we shouldn't just think about it as much as edge gets positioned as a great platform for delivering new enterprise applications. It's also a great platform for supporting ongoing operator networks and their network renovation, including things like OpenRAN and how you can cite some of those functions at the edge.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to bring it back, if I may, to a broader perspective as well. I mean, you've talked there, both of you, about a lot of the opportunities ahead, but let's kind of zone in on some of the major challenges ahead in 5G rollouts. Peter, the industry's made great headway in the last 12, 24 months on 5G. I mean, what do you see, though, as still some of the very obvious challenges out there?
Sure. So I'll take one more broad in terms of 5G and one on OpenRAN. On the 5G side of things, it's obviously just a function of spectrum, right? There's spectrum out there. Some regulators are doing their piece, but we need a combination of high band, mid band, and low band spectrum for 5G. And clearly more spectrum will help scale 5G. On the OpenRAN side of things, it's not too surprising. Number one is integration. I think operators see that as the particular issue where, I mean, Bejoy called it out, right? The value prop is pulling together multiple vendors. Having someone that can integrate them all together is critical. And I think that's, we see a number of companies stepping up to the plate. We just need to see more of that.
Bejoy, Peter called out spectrum and OpenRAN integration. Can you think of anything else that kind of what keeps you awake at night at the moment?
I mean, it's the usual, apart from these usual challenges that you have with maturing any new technology. Peter talked about the ecosystem itself evolving, whether it's spectrum, it's device ecosystem, architecture in which you deploy. So you have NSA, SA networks, so the complexity of doing it. And as operators now look at scaling their network, there would be an increased focus on the ROI and how these technologies gets rolled out. The good thing is that you now have a larger set of toolkits in your toolset box, which can be utilized, such as network slicing is a very good example for future utilization, how to monetize 5G. But you also have to look at how operators need to themselves evolve to become digital service providers, because unless you get there and you're agile and fast in the delivery of new products and services, you cannot really monetize on 5G. And this is a challenge that we see with existing deployments and brownfield operators, is the pace at which they could migrate and become those true digital service providers. And choice of the right architecture, picking the right vendors are extremely critical factors which will decide how they address these challenges that it's there globally for all 5G operators.
Finally, Bejoy, I mean, we've talked a lot about innovation and technology, which is great, of course, but all players in the ecosystem, well, they've got to make money at the end of the day. So how does the 5G network make business sense, do you think? I mean, what are the business opportunities driven by 5G and an open network architecture? Because that's what operators really want to know.
I'd say it's well known that the exponential growth in data traffic is not really corresponding to revenue opportunities for operators at this point. So there needs to be very close attention paid to how these networks are scaled out. It needs to be built the most efficient way so that the cost of running these networks are much lower. And that's where the open network comes in. As I mentioned earlier in one of the questions that you asked, it's about applying these common tools across the end-to-end network so it can optimize and run these networks at a lower cost. You talk about openness and where OpenRAN could play in. The radio network is the most expensive part of the operator network. Being able to reduce the total cost of ownership of that part of your network, significant savings that the operator has, which could then be applied in other areas. Another key factor I would call out is the use of public cloud. That changes the economics of how operators run their network. You're switching from a CapEx model of today into an OpEx model, and also the way you dimension and run your network could change as well. Rather than over-dimensioning for peak capacity, you could now just run it at the right capacity and offload into a public cloud as and when needed. So many different ways in which you could monetize and run the network much more efficiently with the use of OpenRAN and open networks.
Peter, any final thoughts on that particular question?
No, I think it's a great point, and it's something that we tend to overlook, which is the fact that although we look for new revenue sources, the fact is saving money is critical, and we know that given where the traffic is, that obviously economizing and rolling out efficient 5G networks is important. But I would say, from an operator perspective, we know that when it comes down to C-suite priorities, growing revenues is always more important than saving money. And so it is critical that we look for new ways to drive new 5G use cases, and hopefully in ways that OpenRAN can support. I think we are seeing some service innovation out there on the backs of OpenRAN. Some of the bigger folks talk about that. I think that will be one of the other challenges going forward for OpenRAN in particular.
Peter, Bejoy, we are unfortunately out of time, but thank you very much for a great discussion, some good insight. It is clear that a successful 5G rollout, well, it does have to adopt a very different game plan to previous generations of mobile technology. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us as part of Mobile World Live's themed week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.